What if the lockdown that we've suffered through, the lockdown that has brought about now 40 million job losses, what if it didn't even save lives? Now, I understand that this is a controversial thing to even ask, but we have to, especially because I am not the least bit convinced that we will not see a request for a second round of lockdowns come this wintertime or to coincide with the flu season. Well, what do we have in terms of data to answer this very controversial question? We got Jordan Schachtel back in the house. He's an investigative journalist, national security analyst. He's written for The Examiner, for the Daily Wire, USA Today, a whole bunch of places. Jordan is back with us. Jordan, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to pose this question to you. And just before we get to that, they said we needed 1 million ventilators, and we needed nothing even close to that. They said we were going to overwhelm the hospitals, nothing even close to that. 500,000 to 2.5 million dead, not even close. I mean, so many of the things we were told by the experts were wrong. But the one thing that they seem certain, is that the lockdowns would save lives. What do you say to that? And what can you tell us about it?
I would say that the fundamental premise behind lockdowns was that it was to slow out the spread of the virus, acknowledging that a lot of people are going to get infected anyway, to retain that critical hospital capacity. What we learned is that the lockdown policies really exacerbated the problem, particularly when it came to the nursing homes, and particularly when it came to Democrat governors deciding that this thing is going to get so bad that we are going to send sick people back into nursing homes. And now what we know, and what should have been obvious to our all-knowing public health experts, was that senior citizens are particularly vulnerable to respiratory viruses. And unfortunately, it has had devastating consequences for the long-term care center communities. You saw this happen in New York City, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, and every state where they issued these orders, the nursing homes were absolutely devastated. When it comes to lockdown in particular, the CDC issued a report this week basically acknowledging that the infection fatality ratio is at least 14, 15 times lower than the initial World Health Organization prediction of 3.4%. And by acknowledging that, they also acknowledge that 40, 50, 60 million Americans have already been affected by the coronavirus, which means that the lockdowns did not work in containment. And this wasn't acknowledged first in the run-up to this that lockdowns were for containment. It was supposed to be to slow down the spread. But if you saw it from Fauci, from Birx, from Governor Cuomo, Governor Murphy in New Jersey, they went on to claim when they moved the goalposts that lockdowns were stopping the spread, and that was never true. And the CDC has basically acknowledged that.
Do we have any way of looking at the data about nationwide, particularly hospitalizations, because that coincides with severe infection, asymptomatic infection, for example? I mean, that's a much less serious issue. And it's also one you're never going to be able to properly test and trace, as they say. But it seems like we had a surge in infections and then a drop off. Every other country all over the world, whether they went with the most severe lockdown or almost no lockdown at all, has also had a similar degree of escalation. Now, not the same numbers, but there was a bump up and a bump down. There's some bumps are more severe than others, but everyone seems to have gone through this period. What do the numbers tell us about the cyclical nature of this virus, if anything?
100% that within certain statistical parameters in countries with similar climates, you saw the same rise, the same drop, no matter what policy was tried. The only distinction here is that countries that did very hard lockdowns, like the countries in the Middle East, where you weren't even allowed to go outside, go to the supermarket, those countries have different data because those lockdowns were so strict, so rigid. It wasn't like New York City where Cuomo left the subways open. But in terms of like these loose lockdowns that you saw throughout Western Europe, in the United States, as opposed to the Swedish model or the Belarus model, there is absolutely no difference which means that lockdowns did nothing to stop the spread. And there's a lot of evidence, possibly on the other side of things, that it could have exacerbated the spread because we know, how the virus spreads in these close confined spaces, and that we know that community transmission isn't that big an issue and the virus doesn't really spread that way. So if anything, there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that lockdowns have done severe damage, not just inside this COVID epidemic, but outside of it with all the mental health, the economic repercussions. But there's still nothing that any legitimate scientists can point to that said, oh yeah, lockdowns have done some positive things. There's just nothing out there, and it's probably the biggest domestic policy blunder in American history. And unfortunately, it's not just America that did this; it's every other country in the world that made the same mistake.
Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.